Building Men is brought to you by Finish the Race Apparel, FTRapparel.com, the creators of all things building men, and by Become Stronger Industries, become-stronger.com, the creators of handmade steel maces, hammers, and other badass equipment. If you are a young man in middle or high school, or if you know a young man in middle or high school, you have to check out the Foundation, the new online community powered by Building Men. This group will meet once every 2 weeks, and we talk about such topics as accountability, authenticity, commitment, confidence, courage, curiosity, humility, integrity, leadership, respect, resiliency, and self-discipline. There are unbelievable guest mentors, guys that we've had on the Building Men podcast that join us for each meeting to give the young men pieces of advice and answer any questions they might have. We also have an online community, an app called Mighty Networks that we use, and this is where the young men have an opportunity to connect, to communicate, to hold each other accountable. And we put out weekly challenges for the young men, and those weekly challenges are geared around our 12 healthy habits, which are sleep, hydration, movement, sunlight, journaling, breathing, strength training, gratitude, nutrition, limiting screen time, reading, and intentional discomfort. So we have an opportunity to join the foundation. There is information in the show notes. Go to Building Men website at buildingmen.io and click on the foundation tab. Go one step further than you thought you could go.
But as I've told so many young people, you have to chase what's in your heart. It's the only way you're ever going to be happy. You know, your parents love you. Every parent loves their child. They want the best for them. But sometimes they don't understand what you want yourself. And you have to chase your path, because otherwise you're living somebody else's dream.
Are you ready?
You're listening to the Building Men podcast with Dennis and Anthony Miralda, brothers on a mission
To help you become the strongest version of yourself, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and physically.
What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the Building Men podcast. As always, I am your host, Dennis Miralda. I am joined today by an individual. She was introduced to me by one of my all-time favorite human beings, Mr. David Waldy. He was on the podcast episode 151, and I think I might have called that Fierce Empathy, and that's his platform. So if he recommends that I speak to someone, it is a no-brainer. That means that this person is heart-centered, really gets it, because David is one of the most heart-centered people I've ever met in my whole life. So really big build-up, and hopefully David shares this out, because, I mean, we're really pumping him up here right now. But I want to introduce the audience to Tanya McCready. She is the co-founder of Winterdance, and her story's really, really cool. Just met her a couple minutes ago, but in the first couple minutes I met her, I knew this is going to be a cool interview. So Tanya, welcome to the podcast.
Oh gosh, thank you for having me. My pleasure to be here, Dennis.
So you met David Waldy. It was a Tony Robbins type event a couple years ago. What led you to go to this Tony Robbins event? I mean, Tony Robbins, the big man, he's my white whale. He's the guy that I'm like, I need to talk to Tony Robbins at some point in my life. And you met David at this event. How did you get there? Why were you there?
That would have been the fall of 2020, and our business, COVID, of course, was running rampant, and we were very much on a what's the worst case scenario for our business. And the worst case scenario was, because of course Canada handled COVID quite a bit differently than the US. We just locked everything down. Our worst case scenario was, we can't run our dog sled tours next winter. How are we going to feed our dogs and our family? So we were looking for options, and that had taken me to a program that Tony was offering. And through there, I met David, and, just all this magic has happened since. So, and of course, we ended up being shut down for most of winter 2021, right, and 75% of our income. But, because of those steps ahead and David and amazing people I met, we survived financially. So very grateful.
Yeah, he's just a great dude. And he does have a way of helping you understand whatever the thing is in front of you. There's a couple different ways to look at it. You could look at it as an opportunity to sulk and say, what was me? Or, okay, you're here right now. It doesn't matter how you got here. This is our reality right now. What are we going to do to move forward out of this place? There's a couple different ways to look at it. So we'll do this in two different ways. So let's get up to that point. That'll be our starting point. It'll be one of those movies where you go backwards to go forward. So to get to that point, you mentioned, you work with dogs, and it's the Winterdance. If somebody just heard that, they might not know. It could look like ballroom dancing out in the middle of the wilderness or something weird like that, but you do.
There's a new idea.
Right? Why not? And you can incorporate that in there. Throw me a little bit of a back end stuff there. We'll call it even. But so you work with dog sled teams, and there's a whole adventure piece to it. So take us all the way back. I watched a YouTube video where it was Colt was your first pup back in the 90s. So talk to us a little bit about like how you started this whole adventure that you and your husband went on.
It's the craziest thing, and you never know where one decision takes you. Right. We walked into a mall. We were living about 4 hours south of here, close to Toronto. And I was going to the University for Environmental Engineering, and Hank's an agricultural millwright by trade. One night after dinner, we just went to the mall and walked in that mall door, and here's this pet store on our left and this adorable red and white husky puppy doing loops around the store as fast as she could go. We went in, played with her, went home. And the next 2 nights we were back playing with her, and the third night she came home with us. And, we thought that night we made the decision to buy a dog, to add a dog to our family. We had no idea. We made a decision that would transform the entire trajectory of our lives. So that's what started it. And then she was everything husky that we had no idea we just got ourselves into. So she ran away, she chased cats, she destroyed our apartment. And in desperation to understand this crazy dog, we got every book we could find on huskies. And one of those books was Race Across Alaska by Libby Riddles. And Libby was the first woman to win 1,000-mile Iditarod dog sled race back in the 80s. Well, when we finished that book, we were hooked on Alaska, the Iditarod, the history and the culture behind this breed. And then the second one came. It's like, well, we got to get another. And then saw the Disney movie Iron Will. I don't know if you remember that one, but it's high. If you haven't seen it, definitely
highly recommend it.
Highly recommend. And then Hank looked at me and said, we got to try dog sledding. So Husky 3 and 4 came into our lives, and then up to 7. And at that point, we weren't really enjoying what we were doing. We both grew up on farms, so city life really wasn't where we wanted to be. My plan had been to become an environmental lawyer, was my ultimate goal. And I worked for 2 years, got my PEng, and then the plan had been go to law school. But where our country was at that time, everyone was paying lip service to the environment, but nobody was really taking it very serious. And I got to the point in my engineering job that I literally felt sick going to work every day, because I'm like, this goes against everything I believe in. So we were looking for options. And one night a friend said, why don't you turn your love for your dogs into a business? That was the starting point. There was a lot of hurdles along the way, but
I'm sure
that was the starting point, and Winterdance was born.
So in your research, what's one or two things that you learned during that time that you're like, okay, we could potentially do something with this? Do you remember learning about the way that they work as a team? Do you remember what were a couple of lessons that you learned in the research portion of it?
Yeah, I mean, when we just had Colt, I think the number one takeaway we had was huskies are pack animals. Mm-hmm. They love being part of a team. And that's where the idea, oh, well, let's get a second one. Then she'll be happier, she'll be calmer. But that was the biggest thing, is that they love people, but they bond with other dogs. I mean, they're a pack animal. So that was kind of all we really learned. Well, that, and of course they need tons of exercise, because the more exercise they get, then they're content and they're happy. If you're looking for a dog and you don't want to run 5 miles a day, do not get a husky. I mean, because that's who they are. If they don't get to expend that energy, they become destructive to get rid of that energy somehow, just like a toddler, right? Like either you keep them entertained or everything goes wrong.
And so from that, you're like, okay, we're gonna get 2 and then 3 and 4, and then all of a sudden you have 2 sled teams. How many dogs do you have right now, Tanya?
Oh, geez. We have 6 new puppies, and we've just brought in some rescues. So I think the number right now is 149.
149. So talk to us a little bit about what that looks like in your world, just logistically. When I hear that people have 3 dogs, I'm like, you're nuts. That's a little bit crazy, but obviously you have a whole compound there. So talk to us a little about logistically what that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, it's our world, but I know it sounds crazy, but everything revolves around the dogs. They have a 5,000 square foot indoor kennel that's radiant heated, through the floors. We have 3 acres of fenced dog parks that they all get to go out and play in every day. But but life revolves around them. I mean, feeding schedules, vet appointments, what the dogs need. So that's every minute of the day. So it's a business that if you don't love it, you'd never be in it.
Do you have a full-time vet that just is your on call whenever you need with that many dogs?
No, we do have a relationship with a vet clinic that's close by that, is one of our greatest relationships, to be honest. She's been our vet for 23 years. And our kids would call her like their godmother because they grew up with her. And she knows our dogs as well as we do. But she is definitely one of our greatest relationships out of this whole thing.
So, the middle school boy in me has to ask the question about what's the poop situation like? What is that like?
Yeah, it's definitely part of life.
It's a shit part of the job.
Our kids found out very quickly when they started school that shit around here is a very common word. It is not acceptable outside of here. But yeah, that's just part of every day, right? It's picking up shit. So yeah. But the better food you feed, of course, the less there is. So usually when we have new staff come in, they're like, wow, for, this many dogs, we kind of thought there would be more. So yeah, you clean twice a day and that's just part of chores.
What are you spending a month on food for the dogs?
It fluctuates. So summertime, we probably sit around 4,500, 5,000 a month for food. Winter, when they're working hard, we go closer to 6,000 to 7,000. When Hank's racing, I don't even calculate it because I don't want to know. I know it's well over 10,000 because then a lot of our meat gets added in as well. So this is a significant part of the bills for sure.
In the winter time, so when the business is going and you're doing these adventures, what does a day in the life of you and Hank look like?
Yeah, we kind of 2 days. We have our weekend days that are crazy, and midweek days. Over the years, we've learned to make them a little less crazy. So we actually have a little bit of sanity in our lives. But generally speaking, we're in the kennel at 7 a.m. Dogs get watered, cleaned. Everybody gets ready for the day. Trucks pull into our big yards because our dogs, it's very special boxes that the dogs all travel to the trail in. And we can load 60 to 90 dogs to go to the trail in like 20 minutes. They all get let out in this big yard and they fight. Not literally fight, but they'll push each other over to try to be the next one to get in the truck to go to the trail. And then
so now you're at the trail. What is that like?
Yeah, so the trail, that's where our guests meet us. It's about 20 minutes from here in North. We have 2,000 acres where we run our tours. And, guests show up and we teach them how to dog sled because most of our customers have never tried dog sledding. So about 20 minutes, we can teach you the bare essentials to safely dog sled. And then we hook the dogs up and it gets noisier and noisier and noisier the more they get hooked up. And then it's time to go. And that's what they live for. So, as we say, we have hand signals because you can't holler over top of them. They're so noisy, barking, howling, yodeling, we want to go. The second they're running, absolute quiet because they're doing what they love to do. And then we take people out for 2 hours or a half day or full day in the wilderness. And yeah, it's hard to explain till you're here because you have so much peace and quiet here in the wilderness. There's no cell phone reception. It's just, you're living in the moment all the time.
Back in time, you're going way back in time. So let's go back in time. The Iditarod, what's the history around that race? Tell us a little bit about it. I've heard about it before. I remember reading a story about it in school. My kids remember reading a story about it in elementary school, but school us a little bit about the race itself.
For sure. So the Iditarod is 50 years old now. I think last year was their 50th anniversary. And it was started by two people to really save sled dogs in Alaska. So Joe Reddington saw sled dogs disappearing in remote Alaska, and that just broke his heart. So they came up with the idea of a 1,000-mile dog sled race to help give people a reason to keep dog sledding front and center and a reason to have dogs as snowmobiles were kind of replacing them. And out of that, I don't know if he had the vision of where it would go in 50 years, but it became, in Alaska, it is the national sport, is dog sledding now. And it's every musher's, they may never get there, but every musher thinks of wow, wouldn't it be cool one day to run the Iditarod?
And so with that race, you've been to the race, obviously. Talk to us about what that's like. It's something that's fascinating to me. What is the actual event like? And then since it's 1,000 miles, how long does it actually take the winning sled team to finish?
Yeah, that's an easy answer. So the winning sled team will do it usually in 8 or 9 days. Last place team usually somewhere between 12 and 14 days because the teams get strung out as the race goes. What it takes to do it. So the first day is the ceremonial start. It's not timed. It's just through the streets of Anchorage. So it's put on for the fans, media, sponsors of the race. And so you're running a dog team through downtown Anchorage, with skyscrapers. Like, it's just the most surreal experience. They truck in snow and build this whole trail through the streets, and it's 13 miles. And they have an auction. So somebody buys the right to ride in each sled. And that's how one of the ways they help money for the race. And yeah, it's just, you're just going through walls of people the whole way. And people will be handing you everything from cupcakes to bottles of beer to, like, it's crazy. Even being a Canadian team, like, people would sing "Oh Canada" as we went by.
Wow.
It was quite an experience. And then the Sunday, you go just north of Anchorage, and that's where the official start is. The year we were there, it was on this lake outside of Wasilla. And there was 80 some teams running that year. So you can imagine 80 some teams, 16 dogs a team. Like, that's over 1,000 dogs on this.
Wow.
And they they build off each other's energy. It's 2-minute starts. So as the first team starts going, the energy and the excitement just builds and builds and builds. You can't explain the energy that's in the air. And on 2-minute starts, every team starts the race. And there's hundreds of people there cheering them on too as they cross the lake and take off on the trail. So for us, that's a big part of the race. For Hank, that's where it starts.
Yeah.
Once he's off that lake, then he's, on his 1,000-mile adventure with the dogs. And
how many times has he done that? How many times has he raced?
Yeah, he's done the Iditarod twice, finished it once, and he's done the Yukon Quest, which is kind of a lesser known 1,000-mile race. He's done that one 4 times.
Wow. Is it more like the Tour de France where at the end of the day, there's like a checkpoint and they stop and they just go for that many days straight?
Yeah, there is checkpoints. The Iditarod has 20 checkpoints. Yukon Quest has 10. Okay. And at those checkpoints, you can refuel your sled. So we have to ship everything to those checkpoints beforehand. So, obviously food for the dogs, food for Hank, any gear they might need, everything is there. But they don't have to. There's a couple checkpoints they have to stay, but on the whole, each musher determines their own race schedule. So some of them will stay in the checkpoints and rest there, but a lot of them will stay outside the checkpoints where it's quieter so their dogs get a better rest. So it's really kind of a free for all as far as who's running what schedule.
And what is the crowd like? Is it the crowd is at the start and the finish, obviously, but is it like, are there thousands of people there watching?
The ceremonial start feels like thousands because, you just have so many people spread over 13 miles. That's for the Iditarod. The Yukon Quest, it wouldn't be that big. Just I think the cities are smaller and the Quest is known of race. But yeah, other than that, the Iditarod, you really can't get there because once you leave Wasilla, everything is fly-in. Like there's no road system to get to any of those checkpoints. So that kind of minimizes, other than media or, a few sponsors and stuff, who will be out in those checkpoints on the trail.
So you mentioned musher. So that's the actual term for the person who's in charge of the 16-dog sled team, right? So exactly. I remember hearing mush. Is that the verb? Do they say mush? Is that what it's called, what the dogs do?
Only in Hollywood. We always chuckle when people come. They're like, "Oh, we're going to say mush." And we're like, "Yeah, probably won't work so well." So I think they say it comes from marcher in French, which is to move, and mush came out of that. And musher, somebody who controls a dog sled team. But yeah, nobody really uses the word mush to make them go.
So when the dogs are on the sled and you're giving commands, is it commands that you're doing verbally to the dogs? Or is it just like pulling on the reins?
Yeah, and that's one thing that a lot of people think, that there is reins, and there actually isn't.
Okay.
The only way a dog team moves, unlike a horse, because a lot of people are used to seeing horses with reins and bits, is by verbal command and the desire to run. Because you can't push a rope, right? Like what happens when you push a rope? It just coils in front of you. That's the only way that sled moves, is the dog's desire to run, and they're tied to the sled. So a musher there is controlling their team simply by verbal commands. They have a brake on the sled, but a 16-dog team, you're never going to stop a team of dogs with just a brake. Never going to happen. So it's 800 pounds of power, right? In 16 dogs. So you've got G, you've got Ha. So G is right, Ha is left. On by is to avoid a distraction, keep moving. Easy is the term we use for, slow down a bit, but you're going to need to use your brake when you use the term easy because they don't like to slow down. And those are your key commands. So other than that, it's, the bond that is built between the musher and the dogs. That's what gets that team through 1,000 miles.
And with those commands, is it the volume of the commands or the cadence that will tell the dog, like, am I going a hard right or am I going more of a soft right? How do you determine within those? Is it like little nuanced things with your voice?
Yeah, I mean, every musher's a bit different, but also there's generally a trail. So, if you want a hard right, it's often G, G, G. It's like, oh, we're
Okay,
keeping going G, right?
got
But
it.
often there is a trail to follow. So if there's a fork and they hear hard, I mean, these lead dogs are brilliant creatures. They know what they're doing. So if they hear ha, ha at a T, it's like, yeah, we're going left. And, they swing a team. We've had one dog, Maverick, an amazing leader. And he was the only dog that we've ever had learn this command. He could do a come ha or a come G, which means literally do 180 degrees. So a 16 string team of dogs is about as long as a tractor trailer to give you a feel for where the sled is to where
Okay.
you're leading. And if Hank would holler come ha to him, he would manage to spin that entire team 180 degrees and no one would get tangled. I mean, he would just pivot them at a full length.
Wow.
He would turn around and come and just keep on running. But we've never had another dog that's been able to learn this. He was pretty unique.
So interesting. I mean, you think about, I coach sports for many years, and there's the individual connection you make to every single player on the team, but then there's also the way that the team connects. I've had some really great players that played for me, but the teams weren't as successful because they did not have that bond. So talk to us a little bit about that process. Are the dogs in each team, do you specifically say, you know what, Maverick and Colt and Floppy and Jojo are all going to come together for this team because we know their personalities? How do you go about creating the team of each dog sled?
Yeah, it's very similar to sports, to be honest. So we start in the fall with a bigger roster. So usually we start with 24 to 30 dogs, and they'll start out fall training. I mean, no different than a football team, really, right? And then as you get further into fall training, you start figuring out who your core of that team is. And then, I mean, there's some people that'll say they want every dog to be perfectly matched physically or having the same gait and all these physical characteristics. They're not as important to us. What we're looking for is heart. Sorry, I have a photo bomber hopping in here.
No, you couldn't have planned it any more perfectly.
No, hi, Jedi. So what we're looking for is a desire to be on that team. Because if their desire to be on that team is so great, we can overcome pretty much any other weakness that they might have. If their desire to be part of that team or to work as part of that team is not there, it doesn't matter how great they are individually. Sorry, now we have a tail. Oh my gosh, tons of photobombing here. It doesn't matter how great their characteristics are if they aren't a team player. If there's too much grief when they're on the team, it destroys the whole team. So, I mean, we've pulled dogs off that team that really should have been on that team. They had the capabilities, but they just didn't have the right personality, the right mindset. Because at the end of the day, you want a team that's willing to work together to get to wherever you want them to go.
Are there specific characteristics of the dogs that, like you said, the lead dog, that is a special dog that's up front? You mentioned Maverick was the one of the only dogs you've ever seen have that capability, or the only one. The other dogs on the team, are there specific characteristics that they have if they're going to be in the middle of the pack or if they're going to be more towards the rear end?
Yeah, I mean, besides your lead dogs, I mean, you have your swinger point dogs, some people call them the same, which are right behind your leaders. They're generally junior leaders. He's back. And so, they also understand the commands, but they just might not be as great as your main lead dogs. Or sometimes you'll just switch them out because asking one dog or one set of dogs to lead 1,000 miles mentally is very challenging. So generally the dogs right behind your lead dogs are also lead dogs. And then you have the dogs at the back, and they're your wheel dogs. And those dogs, I mean, technically they're pulling more because they're closest to the sled. They're counterbalancing the sled. They're keeping it on trail when you're going around corners. So they're usually your biggest and your strongest dogs, because they're closer to the back of the sled. But other than that, I mean, the personalities, just like any team you put together, right? There's so many personalities. There's your workhorses, there's the serious ones, the peacemakers, the cheerleaders, and you need them all, right, to have a great team, because where one is weak, the other is strong. And when you find the weakness and the strength of every single one of those team members, that's when you start building a team, because then you know what they can do, what they're capable of, and you can lean into one's strengths when you know somebody else is having a weakness. So the better you know your team, it's magical what you can create.
So perfect person to answer the nature versus nurture question. Then I'm always fascinated by this. Do you recognize specific characteristics of the dogs when they're puppies, when they're born? Like this pup is, we could see it's going to be a leader. This pup just has whatever it is. Or are they socialized by the other dogs as they're hanging out with them, or they're learning, or they're doing things together, that their personalities start to come out more?
It's kind of both, to be honest. I mean, it goes back to the age-old question, right? Are leaders born or are they developed?
Right.
And in our experience, it's both. Because there will be pups, not always, but occasionally when we have a litter of pups, there's one pup that's the first to do everything. Fearless. You know, they're the first to be out of the bed, first to go away from mom, first to run down with the big dogs. And 9 times out of 10, that pup will become a leader. But that's probably maybe 20% of our leaders. The others have developed their leadership skills as they've got older. We've had dogs that have been 4 or 5 years old that have never shown any desire to lead, but every fall we switch dogs up so they get a chance to run in different positions, try different positions. And all of a sudden you'll see a dog go like, I kind of like doing this leading thing. And, you know, then we team them up with a senior leader that is nurturing. And obviously a hard driving senior leader would just terrify them. But a nurturing senior leader will just mentor them in the way a dog mentors. They'll teach them so much faster than we ever could. And they'll help them bring their leadership skills along. So yeah, it's both. I mean, we do have the leaders literally from the time they're born, but a lot more of them become leaders throughout their lives.
That's fascinating to me. You mentioned too about Maverick and like how the dogs interact with each other as they're getting onto the truck or to the van to come over. There's a lot of that, you know, more aggressive type thing. Like, I want to be the one that does this. The dogs that are the leaders, do you see them in the social settings outside of the sled racing where their personality is like, we know who the leader is of the entire crew when they're together? Like, this dog sticks out as like the alpha dog of the group.
Sometimes yes, but not always.
Okay.
And I think that's the same as when we think of leaders that are people. There are some people, leaders, that they're always going to be the alpha no matter what room they're in, right? Or they expect to be the alpha no matter which room they're in. And there's others that don't want to be noticed any different than anyone else. And we've seen the same in the dogs. Lily was one of our greatest leaders. And I get asked this question a lot if I go back through the years, even split male to female leaders that have been our great leaders. Lily didn't demand it, but she was such a hard driving leader that everyone kind of half feared, half respected her. So everyone always gave her a huge berth, like, oh, Lily's there. We're just going to go around Lily. Where other ones you wouldn't notice whatsoever. So it's really personality based. And we've had every gamut of personality as leaders. You know, to think that a leader has to be the hard driving one, sometimes they are, but not always. Maverick was this big fluffy lover. I mean, if he saw people, he'd be like, oh, I love people. So it's, yeah, every personality is different. Charlie is another great leader, and she's an absolute clown and just always a comedian. I mean, she's always pulling pranks on everyone. But yet when it comes time to work, I mean, her nose is to the ground and she's off and working. Yeah, there's so many personalities, which it's fascinating, right? That they all do the same job, but from their own perspective.
That is absolutely fascinating. So what is their career, quote unquote, on the dog sled?
Yeah, I mean, the race team, Lily was our oldest. She was 11 when she trained for her second Iditarod. Hank had no plans on taking her, but he was like, well, like, she wants to train, so I'll let her train with us this fall, you know, help build up some of the younger dogs. And then she did so awesome that he ended up taking her to Alaska with him. And she didn't end up running. Was doing right now. He is crunching something. Come here, you boy. So he ended up taking her to Alaska because our veterinarian said she could give him no reason not to take her. And she ran the ceremonial start, did amazing. So Hank had actually spent most of the night debating, do I take her, do I not, for the official start? And that morning he decided he would take her, even if she only went to the first checkpoint or two, and then she'd fly back out. And he opened the truck box to take her out because leaders are always hooked up first. And she refused to come out.
Wow.
She decided for him. She'd been there. She knew where she was, what she was doing. And she decided she wasn't going with them. So yeah, race team kind of 10 is our oldest, but on tours, which obviously aren't as physically demanding. I mean, we've had dogs 13, 14 still running tours. And retirement is hard for them because they love doing what they do. So usually we're the ones trying to pull them back and say, well, let's just do a short run today, or maybe 2 runs this week. Because some of them will actually go on hunger strikes because they love doing what they do so much.
So when you typically do a crew that comes up, and you're doing like one of these adventure expeditions, the Winterdance, building men of character, integrity, strength, compassion, and empathy through transformational mentoring, coaching, and motivational speaking is our mission here at Building Men. To work with me as a one-on-one life coach, you can find information in the show notes, or you can visit our website at buildingmen.io, where you can book a free 30-minute discovery call to help you become the strongest version of yourself mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and physically. Now, back to the show. Is it like rotating the tires? You're like, all right, we're going to take Lily and Maverick and Colt today, and then they're going to go back into the rotation. I'm going to pull out the next 3 dogs for the next time.
Yes, absolutely it is. It's not kind of the same. It's managed very carefully. We have what we call, it's one of our most valuable tools, a dog day off list. So every dog that runs gets marked down that day that they were able to run. And the younger dogs don't run as much because you don't want to put too much stress on your young guys. Same with your old guys. And then you have your core of your kennel that's kind of the 3 to 8, 9-year-olds. And they'll obviously run more than the younger guys or the old guys. But everybody gets at least 3 days off a week. Not that they, if you see the kennel in the morning, like they're jumping, howling, like, come on,
Yeah.
go. But everybody needs time off, right? Whether you want it or not.
And so how do you determine, can you look at all 149 dogs and be like, I know every single one of them by sight?
You have to. You can't work with them if you don't, right? Even when we bring in new staff, we say, can you learn 150 names in a month? And I think Hank says 2 weeks, actually. And they'll be like, they know that they're supposed to say yes, but they're like, I don't think I can. Yeah, I can do that. And certainly we've never let anyone go because they can't. But bottom line, if you don't know them, you can't work with them, right? Because if Hank takes a dog off the truck and says, put, Jeff with Flash, and you don't know who either of them are, you can't build that team. Or if you're out on the trail and 2 dogs aren't getting along and you're like, well, we got to switch, Polar with Gillum, and you don't know who they are, you're kind of lost. So not only do you have to know their names and by sight, you also have to know what positions they run. You have to know who are the lead dogs, who are not the lead dogs, who don't like each other, who do like each other. I mean, there's all these dynamics. So it's a lot to run a team of dogs.
What's your system then for record keeping there? Do you have, is it a digital system? Do you have like the Winterdance journal that gets passed on from generation to generation?
No, we're not that tech. It's mainly paperwork, to be honest. So, and in our heads, because paper sometimes can be a crux too, right? And when you're at the trail, you don't have time to look at a book like,
Right.
Who's our lead dogs? You got to know. So of course we do have, the dog days off are all logged and all that kind of stuff. But as far as knowing who is who, you just got to know, and you've got to know who your leaders are, who likes who and who doesn't. But this is what we do, right? I mean, from the time we get up to the time we go to bed, the dogs are alive. So people are usually surprised how fast they do get to know them.
Who names the puppies when they're born?
It's a huge process. We have a theme for every litter. So the litter that was born recently, they were born right around Christmas. So it's like, well, this has to be a Christmas themed litter. That's just easy. So all 4 of our kids get their input and our staff get their input. And then we usually put it out to our social channels so people can make suggestions. And then we're not very fast at naming because we kind of want the names to fit the pups.
Right.
So this litter, there's 3 that have firm names, 2 that we're pretty sure of, and 1 we're still working on. So, but yeah, we get there with them, but the name has to fit the pup.
So if you were to pick out your top 3 dog names of all time that it was a really creative name, a really funny name, or one that resonated with you, which would you pick out?
Gosh.
Not the dog, just the name itself.
Yeah, see that, and that's the difficulty because the name is the dog,
right?
So
right.
It's hard to kind of separate them. Probably one would be a dog that we adopted. Actually, his name was Rip, and spelled like rest in peace, R-I-P.
Okay.
And he was one of the biggest handfuls of a dog that we have ever had. I mean, he was so conniving. So he was beautifully named. We had another dog named Rebel, and was she a rebel?
Okay.
Gosh, So many names. We have the Harry Potter litter, the Wild West litter. There's so many. I can't think of a third one right off the top of my head.
So did you have, like, was it like Severus Snape and you had Dobby? What were some of the Harry Potter names?
Our Harry Potters, actually, we had 3 girls, 3 boys. So Ron, Harry, and Albus
Hermione?
were boys. Our girls were Hermione and Hedwig and Ginny.
Okay.
Because we already had a few of the names, so we couldn't. We had a Luna already and a few of the others, so they were the 6 that they ended up settling on.
Oh, that's so cool.
Probably the craziest one we've had. Those one year the boys wanted to go with Lord of the Rings. That was a horrible decision because nobody knows the names. So you'll tell a customer like, this is Eowyn, and they'll be like, I mean, their mind just doesn't connect with Eowyn. So poor Eowyn ends up with so many different names, or Tariel or Gimli. Everybody gets, Gimli is pretty simple, but yeah, the ladies, they get their names so messed up.
Yeah. Well, I was having a conversation with my daughter this morning. She's on a Lord of the Rings dive. So her Legolas is her favorite character, the blonde elf who could shoot the arrows like nobody's business.
Yes.
I just had a conversation about Lord of the Rings this morning. Do you ever have any like a Gollum or Smeagol type character as a dog name, or do you want them to all be positive? Do you want a Darth Vader name for a dog, or are they more the hero type names?
Yeah, and we have that debate. We actually have a Star Wars litter, and they're all the hero names. So they're Luke, Leia, Chewie, Hans, and Ben. Obi, but Ben is what he's got. Vader didn't come up. This Christmas litter, actually, we have one of the pups was born with deformed legs, and it was a C-section. So one of the vet techs was like, "Oh my gosh, you got to name this pup Tiny Tim," and everyone was like, "Oh yeah, we got to name him Tiny Tim." Now, thankfully, his legs are straight. I think he'll be perfectly fine. And Hank's like, by default, he's going to be the biggest bloody dog we've ever had.
Right.
So everyone's like, "Oh, then we need a Scrooge," and we're like, I don't know about that. So I think Grinch is going to win. Everybody wants a Grinch. And as everyone says, he ends up becoming a wonderful guy with a big heart.
Right. Same thing with Scrooge. And one could argue Darth Vader too. Darth Vader ultimately was the one who killed the Emperor at the end of Return of the Jedi. So, there's a lot there.
It is good. Yes.
I love that. I love the intentionality behind the naming of the dogs. When we started this, Tanya, I said, I don't script anything. So every question that I'm asking is just for the moment as we're going through. But I also would love to know about the lessons that you could teach individuals, say high school kids or their parents, about what lessons of teamwork, of life, of resiliency have you learned from these dogs that would absolutely benefit young men right now?
Yeah, I mean, when we decided to walk away from our careers to start a dog sled tour business, we took a lot of flack from people that loved us most. Not that they wanted bad for us; they didn't see the vision we saw. When you tell your parents that you're walking away from an engineering career and acceptance to law school to start a dog sled tour business and move to the wilderness, it is not a real popular decision. Right. But as I've told so many young people, you have to chase what's in your heart. It's the only way you're ever going to be happy. Your parents love you. Every parent loves their child. They want the best for them. But sometimes they don't understand what you want yourself. And you have to chase your path, because otherwise you're living somebody else's dream. And I know my biggest gripe with school systems, and I don't know if the US is different than Canada, but so often we try to pigeonhole our kids into what we think they're good at. And if you're good at this, then this is the career you should chase. And you have great marks, so you should go to university, or you don't have great marks, so you shouldn't go to university. And there's just so many other options for kids. And nobody knows your potential but you. No one knows your potential but you. And never sell yourself short, because what you can do is absolutely unbelievable.
I love that. And here's the thing, until you try new experiences, how would one ever know if they have a propensity to race a dog sled ever, unless they try something like that? Like, unless they try that experience out, how would someone ever know that would be the case? So I would love to know, before I ask my last question, Tanya, I'd love to know, how do we get in touch with you, find you, watch what you're doing, or even sign up for one of these experiences?
Absolutely. So winterdance.com is the easiest way to find anything about us, from our books to, dog sledding, everything is there, connected through socials. And I think if we have time, Dennis, just, the second part of that question of advice for young people is you don't have to have it all figured out. I have a 17-year-old daughter. Her brothers knew what they wanted to do when they were 5 years old. She has no idea, and she thinks she is so behind everybody. Hank never stepped on a dog sled till he was 30 years old.
I'm 46 and I still don't know. I'm still unsure, right?
Absolutely. And every challenge that comes our way is it's a silver lining if you look for it. You don't want the challenges, but there's blessings and stories and lessons in every single one of them.
I love that. It's great. I will put all that information in the show notes for anyone who's listening right now. The last question that I asked Tanya is, great stuff. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I had no idea where it was going to go. Obviously, I've never interviewed someone in this realm. So it was brand new for me. I learned so much during this episode, as did people listening as well. But if somebody's listening right now and they press stop, and there's one thing that person can do, and by doing this one thing, whatever that thing is, it will change the course of their life. What's that one thing someone could do right now?
Start. Whatever you're thinking about doing, just start. We spend so much time in our heads. Are we good enough? What are people going to say? But really all it comes down to is just starting.
Yep.
Because once you start, you're on that path. And any journey starts with the first step, no matter how far that journey takes you.
100,000 mile. I did a red race starts with that first step, right? It's Step one is start. Step two is keep going.
Keep going.
That's it.
Do not
keep
stop.
going. Repeat step two as many times as it takes, right?
There is no failure, only lessons.
Love that. This is a really cool experience, getting an opportunity to know you, your story, everything that you're doing. It's really, really awesome. I'm going to put it out there in the universe. At some point, I will meet you in person and, do that little 20-minute intro before I'm out in the wilderness, enjoying that silence with a team of dogs in front of me. So I'm going to put that out there in the universe right now.
Absolutely.
Building Men audience, go one step further than you thought you could go. We'll see you next time on Building Men.